move.
My teenager posted my salary online to shame me, so I showed her exactly what that salary paid for. The screenshot had 47,000 views before I even woke up. My daughter Brianna had posted my pay stub to her Instagram story at 2 a.m. with a crying laughing emoji and the caption, "No wonder we're poor. This is what my mom makes working 50 hours a week. Embarrassing." The image showed my name, my hourly wage of $18.75, and my gross pay of $1,847.23 for 2 weeks of work at Riverside Medical Center, where I'd been a certified nursing assistant for 11 years. Her 2,300 followers had seen it. Her friends had screenshotted it. Someone had reposted it to a local gossip account with the comment, "Imagine working that hard for that little." By 8 a.m., my phone was blowing up with notifications from coworkers asking if I was okay. My supervisor Nadine called me into her office before my shift even started, her face tight with concern and something else I couldn't quite identify. She closed the door behind me and pulled up her own phone, showing me the screenshot that was now circulating among hospital staff. I sat in that office chair feeling my chest compress as I scrolled through the comments. Some people were defending me, saying CNAs were underpaid and overworked, but others were laughing, calling me a loser who should have gone to college, asking why anyone would stay at the same dead-end job for over a decade. Nadine told me the hospital's HR department was already aware, and they were trying to figure out if this violated any policies, since it showed my full legal name and the facility's information. I couldn't speak. I just stared at my own salary on that screen, the number I'd always felt ashamed of now broadcast to thousands of strangers. Nadine asked if I needed to go home, but I shook my head because I couldn't afford to miss a shift. Every hour counted. Every hour had always counted. I walked onto the floor at 7:32 a.m. with my badge clipped to my scrubs, and my heart sitting somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Mrs. Delgado in room 304 needed to be turned and cleaned. Mr. Pham in 308 was calling for pain medication again. Life in the hospital didn't stop because my 16-year-old daughter had decided to humiliate me online. I changed adult diapers and monitored vital signs and helped patients walk to the bathroom while my phone kept buzzing in my pocket with every new comment and share. By my lunch break, the post had been taken down from Brianna's account, but the damage was already done. Screenshots lived forever. I sat in the break room with a sandwich I couldn't taste, watching a younger CNA named Destiny scroll through her phone and then look up at me with that particular expression people get when they've just seen something about you online. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I called Brianna during my 15-minute break, standing in the stairwell where no one could hear me. She answered on the fourth ring with a sigh so dramatic I could picture her rolling her eyes. I asked her what she was thinking, posting my personal information like that. She said it wasn't personal because everyone knew I was broke anyway. She said her friends' parents all made way more money, and she was tired of being the poor kid in their group. She said maybe if I'd done something with my life instead of wiping butts for a living, she wouldn't be so embarrassed to be my daughter. I stood in that stairwell listening to my own child speak to me like I was nothing. Like the sacrifices I'd made, the shifts I'd worked while sick, the overtime I'd taken to pay for her dance lessons and her braces and her iPhone didn't matter. The line went dead before I could respond. She'd hung up on me. I finished my shift at 7 p.m., 12 hours after I'd started, and drove home in the dark. My apartment building looked the same as it always did. 3 stories of beige stucco with a courtyard that management never maintained. I climbed the stairs to Unit 214 and let myself in to find Brianna on the couch watching TikTok with her earbuds in, completely unbothered by the destruction she'd caused that day. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a kitchen that opened into the living room. I'd lived here since Brianna was 4 years old, since her father Derek walked out and left me with a toddler and $23,000 in credit card debt he'd racked up without telling me. I'd clawed my way out of that hole one paycheck at a time. I'd worked doubles and triples. I'd missed Brianna's school plays and her dance recitals because I was picking up extra shifts to keep us housed and fed, and this was how she repaid me. I stood in the doorway of our apartment watching my daughter laugh at something on her phone, completely oblivious to my presence, and I made a decision. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked into the kitchen, pulled out a notebook, and started writing. The next morning was Saturday, and Brianna slept until noon as usual. I was up at 6 a.m. because my body didn't know how to sleep in anymore after 11 years of early shifts. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and a calculator, working through numbers I'd never shared with her. When she finally emerged from her room around 12:30, hair tangled and phone already in hand, she found me waiting. The kitchen table was covered in papers, bank statements, bills, receipts from the past 3 months. She looked at the mess and asked what was going on, her voice carrying that edge of teenage annoyance that had become her default setting. I told her to sit down. She rolled her eyes and said she was meeting Jade at the mall in an hour. I told her to sit down again, and something in my voice must have changed because she actually listened. She dropped into the chair across from me, still clutching her phone, and waited with obvious impatience for whatever lecture she assumed was coming. But I didn't lecture her. I slid the first paper across the table instead. "This is our rent," I said. $1,450 per month. I pointed to the line item on my bank statement showing the automatic withdrawal. "This apartment, these 2 bedrooms, the roof over your head. That's $725 per paycheck, almost half of what you saw on that pay stub you posted." Brianna blinked at the paper but didn't respond. I slid the next document across. "This is our electricity bill. $127 last month, which was actually low because I've been keeping the thermostat at 78 to save money even though I know you complain about being hot. This is the internet bill. $65 per month, which you need for your homework but also for all the streaming you do. This is my car payment. $287 per month for the Nissan that gets you to school and dance in your friends' houses. This is the car insurance. $156 per month, which went up after I added you as a driver. This is the gas I put in that car. About $200 per month depending on prices. Are you following me so far?" Brianna's expression had shifted from annoyance to something harder to read. She set her phone face down on the table, which was unusual enough that I noticed. I kept going. "This is the grocery bill," I said, sliding over receipts from the past month. $487 total in April. That includes the almond milk you like, even though regular milk is half the price. The organic chicken because you decided you don't eat conventional meat anymore. The protein bars you take to school. The energy drinks I told you not to buy but you put in the cart anyway. This is my phone bill. $145 per month for both of our lines, including your unlimited data plan that you said you'd die without. This is your dance studio tuition. $175 per month for the competition team that you begged me to let you join. This is the cost of your last competition, which included the registration fee, the costume, the hotel room since it was 2 hours away, and the meals we ate. $463 for one weekend. Brianna's face had gone pale. She was staring at the receipts like she'd never seen them before, which she probably hadn't because I'd always shielded her from the financial reality of our lives. I kept pulling papers from the pile. Health insurance, car maintenance, the co-pays for her therapy sessions that I'd started taking her to last year when she was struggling with anxiety, the prescription cost for her medication, the dentist, the eye doctor, the new glasses she needed in January. I added it all up for her. Every month, our basic expenses totaled approximately $3,800. My take-home pay after taxes and deductions was around $2,800 per month. Brianna stared at me and asked how we weren't homeless. I explained that I picked up overtime whenever I could, sometimes working 60 hours a week instead of 40. I explained that I hadn't bought myself new clothes in 2 years, that I cut my own hair, that I made my own coffee instead of buying it, that I packed my lunch every single day while my coworkers ordered delivery. I explained that my phone was 4 years old and cracked but still worked. I explained that I'd been putting off getting my own dental work done because I couldn't afford the copay. I explained that the last time I went to a movie theater was when she was in middle school. I explained that I drove a 10-year-old car with 140,000 miles because I couldn't afford anything newer. I explained that every financial decision I made was calculated against whether it would keep us above water or push us under. And then I asked her a question. I asked her where she thought the money came from for everything she enjoyed. The dance, the phone, the almond milk, the Uber Eats orders she placed when I was at work, the Amazon packages that showed up at our door. All of it. Brianna didn't answer. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying yet. I wasn't done. I pulled out one more document, the one I'd printed at the library the night before. It was an itemized breakdown of everything I'd spent on her in the past 12 months. Dance alone was $3,200, including tuition, competitions, costumes, and travel. Her iPhone 14 that she'd demanded last fall because her old phone was embarrassing was $1,200 with the case and screen protector. Her clothes, easily $1,000 over the year despite her complaints that she never had anything to wear. Her makeup and skincare products that she ordered online, maybe $400. The school field trips, the senior photos she wanted even though she was only a sophomore, the homecoming dress, the birthday party at the escape room with her friends. I added it all up. Approximately $7,500 spent specifically on Brianna in the past 12 months, beyond basic necessities like food and shelter. I asked her to look at that number and then look at my annual salary, which after overtime was maybe $42,000 before taxes. I asked her to calculate what percentage of my income went directly to making her life comfortable while I worked myself into exhaustion and did without so she wouldn't have to. She finally broke. The tears came in a rush, and she put her head down on the table among all those papers and receipts, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. Part of me wanted to comfort her. Part of me wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her it was okay, that I'd always take care of her, that she didn't need to worry about money because that was my job. But I'd been doing that for 16 years, and all it had gotten me was a daughter who thought my salary was embarrassing content for social media. I sat there and waited. The mall trip wasn't happening. Jade would have to wait. After maybe 10 minutes, Brianna lifted her head. Her mascara was streaked down her face, and her nose was running, and she looked nothing like the polished, confident teenager who'd posted that screenshot. She looked like a scared kid who'd just realized the ground beneath her wasn't as solid as she'd thought. She asked me why I never told her any of this. I said because I wanted her to have a normal childhood, to not worry about money the way I'd worried about it every single day of her life. I said I thought protecting her from financial stress was good parenting, but I was starting to think I'd made a mistake. Brianna apologized. She said she was sorry, that she didn't know, that she felt horrible. I told her I appreciated the apology, but words were easy. I told her that because of what she did, my coworkers had seen my salary. My boss had seen it. People I'd worked with for a decade now knew exactly what I made and had watched strangers mock me for it online. I told her that kind of humiliation didn't just disappear because she said sorry. She asked what she could do to make it right, and I told her I'd been thinking about that all night. I had a plan. She wasn't going to like it, but she was going to understand exactly what that salary paid for by experiencing what life looked like without it. Starting immediately, she was going to learn what it meant to live on $18.75 an hour. The color drained from Brianna's face. She asked what I meant, and I explained that for the next 3 months, she was going to participate in running this household. She was going to see every bill, every expense, every financial decision. She was going to help me budget, help me plan meals around sales and coupons, help me decide what we could afford and what we couldn't. And she was going to get a job. She tried to protest that she had dance and school and friends. I reminded her that I had work and bills and a child who needed raising, and I still managed to fit it all in. I told her she could keep her dance commitment, but the weekends she wasn't at competitions, she would be working. I'd already looked into it, and the cafe down the street from the dance studio was hiring. They paid $11 per hour to start, which would give her a first-hand understanding of exactly how long it took to earn the money she spent so freely. Brianna sat with this information for a long moment. I could see her calculating, weighing her options, wondering if she could talk her way out of it. Then she surprised me. She nodded slowly and said okay. She said she deserved it. She said she didn't understand what she was doing when she posted that screenshot, that it was just supposed to be funny, that all her friends complained about their parents online and she wanted to fit in. I told her that was a terrible excuse, but at least it was honest. Fitting in was important to teenagers. I remembered being 16, but some things mattered more than fitting in, and basic respect for the person who kept you alive was one of them. That afternoon, we walked together to the cafe where I helped her fill out an application. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Sandra, asked Brianna about her availability and her experience. Brianna admitted she had none, that this was her first job, and I watched her squirm with discomfort at having to ask a stranger to give her a chance. Sandra looked at me, then at Brianna, and said she could start next weekend. $11 an hour, weekends only to start, 3-hour shifts. Brianna would make maybe $66 per week before taxes. I wanted her to understand how small that number was compared to everything she consumed. On the walk home, Brianna was quiet. She kept checking her phone, but the frantic scrolling I was used to seeing wasn't there. She was just staring at the screen, maybe reading the leftover comments from her post that still existed, even though the original was gone. When we got back to the apartment, she went straight to her room and closed the door. I heard her crying again through the wall, and I let her. Some lessons required tears. The first week was brutal for both of us. I made Brianna sit with me while I paid bills online, showing her exactly how I prioritized expenses. Rent first, always, because without a home, nothing else mattered. Then utilities, then car payment, then insurance. Food and gas were flexible because I could adjust them based on what was left over. She watched the numbers in our checking account drop as each payment processed, and by the time we reached the end of the list, there was $127 remaining until my next paycheck in 5 days. She asked what happened if something unexpected came up, like the car breaking down or one of us getting sick. I showed her the emergency fund I'd been building for years, $800 total saved up in a separate account that I touched only for true emergencies. She looked at that number and her face crumpled again. Her iPhone cost more than my entire safety net. I let her sit with that realization because it was important. Most people didn't have a cushion to fall back on. Most people were one disaster away from losing everything. Brianna's first shift at the cafe was the following Saturday. She came home after 3 hours with sore feet and a headache and $33 before taxes. She'd made lattes and cleaned tables and smiled at customers who were sometimes rude to her because service workers were invisible to certain kinds of people. She dropped onto the couch still wearing her apron, and I asked her how it went. She said it was hard. She said she'd never realized how demanding customers could be, how much energy it took to stay pleasant when someone was complaining that their coffee wasn't hot enough or their muffin was the wrong size. She said one woman had left a mess at her table and 0 tip, and Brianna had to clean it up while the woman laughed with her friends on the way out. I told her welcome to my world, times 100, because at least the cafe customers could walk and talk and feed themselves. The patients I cared for were often confused, sometimes combative, frequently in pain. I'd been hit, kicked, scratched, and screamed at. I'd held the hands of people taking their last breaths while their families wept in the hallway, and I did it all for $18.75 an hour. Brianna looked at me differently after that first shift. Something had shifted behind her eyes. 2 weeks into the experiment, Brianna asked if she could invite Jade over. I said yes, but I warned her that things would be different than usual. We weren't ordering pizza or doing Uber Eats. If she wanted to feed her friend, she could help me make dinner from what we had in the kitchen. Brianna agreed, which surprised me, and she actually seemed nervous about it. Jade arrived around 5 p.m., a pretty girl with expensive highlights and designer jeans, and the kind of effortless confidence that came from never worrying about money. She looked around our apartment with an expression I couldn't quite read, taking in the secondhand furniture and the small TV and the kitchen where nothing matched. Brianna gave her a quick tour that lasted about 30 seconds because there wasn't much to tour. Then they came back to the kitchen where I was teaching Brianna how to stretch a pound of ground beef into a meal that would feed 4 people by adding rice and beans and vegetables from the freezer. Jade watched us cook with obvious confusion. She asked why we didn't just order something, and Brianna explained that they were saving money. When she realized it wasn't, she got quiet. Dinner was awkward. Jade picked at her food and kept checking her phone, probably texting her other friends about how weird this was. Brianna ate everything on her plate without complaint, which was new. After dinner, they went to Brianna's room, and I could hear them talking through the door. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the apartment was small and their voices carried. Jade was asking why Brianna had been so weird lately, why she never wanted to hang out at the mall anymore, why she'd taken a job at a cafe instead of asking her mom for money. Brianna's voice was harder to hear, but I caught fragments. She was explaining about the bills, about the budget, about how much things actually cost. Jade's response was dismissive. Something about how everyone's parents were dramatic about money, but they always figured it out. I heard Brianna get louder, defending me for maybe the first time in years. She said her mom worked harder than anyone she knew and didn't deserve to be laughed at. There was a silence after that, and then Jade made an excuse about having to get home early. She left without saying goodbye to me. Brianna came out of her room looking upset, but also something else. Something like proud. The next day at school, Brianna texted me during her lunch break. This was unusual because she almost never initiated contact during school hours. The text said, "Some people are talking about that post, about your salary. They're saying stuff." My stomach dropped. I asked what kind of stuff, and she sent me a screenshot. Someone had made a meme out of my pay stub, adding the caption POV, "Your mom peaked as a butt wiper." The comment section was full of laughing emojis and people tagging their friends. I sat in the break room at the hospital looking at that image of my own financial information turned into a joke, and I felt something crack in my chest. Not break, crack. Like a window with a rock through it, damage spreading in all directions. Nadine found me there 10 minutes later, still staring at my phone. She asked if I needed to talk to HR again, if there was anything the hospital could do. I shook my head because there was nothing anyone could do. Once something was on the internet, it existed forever. I would always be the CNA with the embarrassing salary to anyone who'd seen that post. But Brianna did something unexpected. She sent me another text that afternoon. I handled it. I didn't know what that meant until I got home and she showed me her phone. She'd posted her own video response to the meme, standing in her room with no makeup and messy hair, looking directly into the camera. In the video, she explained that she was the one who'd originally posted that pay stub, and it was the worst thing she'd ever done. She talked about what she'd learned over the past 2 weeks about her mom's actual financial reality. She talked about how CNAs were essential workers who kept hospitals running while being chronically underpaid. She talked about the patients her mom cared for, the shifts she worked, the sacrifices she made. She said her mom wasn't embarrassing. She said her mom was a hero. And she apologized publicly, not just to me, but to every service worker who'd ever been mocked for their income. The video had 12,000 views already. The comments were different this time. People sharing their own stories of underpaid work. People defending CNAs and nurses and caregivers. People calling Brianna brave for admitting she was wrong. It wasn't a solution. It didn't erase what had happened, but it was something. Week 4 brought a new challenge. Brianna got her first paycheck from the cafe, $89.47 after taxes for 12 hours of work across 4 shifts. She held that slip of paper and stared at it like she couldn't believe the number was real. She'd imagined working meant instant money, easy money, a simple exchange of time for cash. The reality was devastating. She'd spent more than that on a single makeup palette she bought last month. She'd spent more than that on the Uber Eats order she placed the week before the salary post, when she got Thai food delivered because she didn't feel like heating up leftovers. I let her sit with those comparisons before asking what she wanted to do with the money. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said she wanted to put half in savings and use the other half to help with groceries. I almost cried. I didn't, because I'd been practicing not crying for 16 years, but my eyes got wet enough that Brianna noticed. She hugged me, something she almost never did anymore, and said she was so sorry, that she had no idea, that she wished she'd understood sooner. I hugged her back and felt something that had been tight in my chest for years start to loosen just a little. But the financial education wasn't the only consequence of her post. The viral nature of the original screenshot had reached people I'd hoped would never see it. Derek, Brianna's father, texted me for the first time in 3 years. He said he'd heard about the situation and wanted to help. I laughed out loud at my phone. Derek, who'd left when Brianna was 4. Derek, who paid child support sporadically when he felt like it. Who owed me over $15,000 in back payments the court never enforced. Derek, who'd remarried a woman with money and now lived in a house with a pool while his daughter and I scraped by in a 2-bedroom apartment. He wanted to help now that our struggle had become public entertainment. I told him where he could put his help, using words I rarely used, and blocked his number. Brianna saw my reaction and asked what was wrong. I showed her the text. Her face went through a complicated series of expressions, anger and hurt, and something that looked like longing. She missed her dad, even though he'd abandoned her. Kids always did. I told her he wasn't worth missing, but I knew that didn't help. The school situation escalated the following week. Brianna came home with a notice that she'd been called to the counselor's office. Apparently, some parents had complained that the original salary post was cyberbullying, and the school wanted to investigate. I went with her to the meeting, sitting in a small office across from a counselor named Mr. Okafor, who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. He explained that while the post had been directed at me and not another student, several parents felt it created a hostile environment by mocking someone's income level. They wanted Brianna to face disciplinary action. I asked what kind of action. He said they were considering a 3-day suspension. My blood went cold. A suspension would go on Brianna's record. It could affect her college applications. It would punish her for something she'd already apologized for publicly, something she was actively trying to make right. I looked at Mr. Okafor and asked if the parents complaining were the same ones whose kids had reposted the meme, who had laughed at it, who had made additional jokes at my expense. He shifted in his chair and admitted that the situation was complicated. I made a decision in that moment. I asked Mr. Okafor for a day to prepare a response before any disciplinary action was taken. He agreed, looking relieved to delay the conversation. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter to the school board. In it, I detailed everything that had happened since the original post. I described the immediate humiliation. I described my workplace finding out. I described the meme that followed. But I also described what Brianna had done since then. Her apology video, her job at the cafe, the financial education she was undergoing, the genuine remorse she'd demonstrated. I argued that suspending her now would punish growth and accountability, the exact things we should be encouraging in teenagers. I sent the letter to the principal, the counselor, and every school board member whose email I could find. Then I waited. 3 days later, Mr. Okafor called to say the investigation had been closed. No suspension, no disciplinary action. The parents who'd complained had been informed that Brianna had already taken responsibility and was actively making amends. One of them had even reached out to me directly, apologizing for jumping to judgment and saying her own daughter had shared the meme and should have faced consequences too. Small victories. I was learning to appreciate them. Month 2 brought unexpected complications. Brianna had been working every weekend at the cafe, getting better at making drinks, earning tips for the first time, learning to handle difficult customers without losing her composure. But then, dance competition season arrived and everything collided. There was a regional competition 4 hours away that required hotel accommodations and travel expenses. The total cost, $387 for registration, costumes, and lodging. Brianna hadn't asked me for anything since the salary post. She'd been using her cafe money to buy her own small luxuries instead of expecting me to provide them. But this was different. This was her passion, the one extracurricular she'd begged to do since she was 8 years old. She came to me with the competition information, not demanding but asking, her voice small. She said she understood if we couldn't afford it. She said she could skip this one if necessary. She said she knew now what that money represented, how many hours of work it translated to, what sacrifices I'd have to make to come up with it. I looked at the forms in her hands and thought about everything she'd learned over the past weeks. The financial lessons had sunk in. She genuinely understood now. I told her we'd figure it out together. We sat down with the budget and looked for places to cut. She suggested canceling the streaming service she used the most. That saved $15. She suggested buying generic brands instead of name brands for the next month. That could save another $30 to $40. She suggested I could take her uniform to the cafe and pick up an extra shift or two over the next few weeks. I pointed out that extra shifts meant less time together, more exhaustion for her, more stress for both of us. She said she wanted to earn part of the money herself. She wanted to pay for her own registration with her cafe earnings, even if it took her entire savings. Watching her do the math, figure out she'd need 5 more shifts to cover the registration alone, I felt proud in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. This was what I'd wanted her to understand. Not that money grew on trees, but that it grew from labor, from sacrifice, from choices made every single day. We agreed on a plan. She would cover registration, I would cover the hotel and travel, and we would both cut back for the next month to make it work. The competition fell on a weekend in late May. We drove the 4 hours together, something we hadn't done in years without fighting. The landscape changed from urban to rural, strip malls giving way to farmland and small towns. Brianna controlled the music for the first half, then let me choose for the second half. We talked about things we'd never discussed before. Her anxiety about junior year coming up, my own high school memories, which were more troubled than I'd ever admitted to her, her hopes for college, which had always seemed abstract but now felt more real because she understood what it would cost and was already thinking about scholarships and financial aid. I told her about my own abandoned college dreams, how I'd started a nursing program at 20 but dropped out when I got pregnant with her, how I'd always planned to go back but life kept getting in the way. She asked why I never told her that. I said because I didn't want her to feel like she ruined my plans. The silence after that admission lasted several miles. At the competition, I watched Brianna perform with her team. They were good, really good, moving in perfect synchronization to a song I didn't recognize, but that made my heart race anyway. When they finished, Brianna's face was flushed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. This was why I worked. This was what the overtime paid for. These moments when my daughter got to chase something she loved, when she got to be excellent at something, when she got to feel the joy of accomplishment. They placed second overall, which wasn't first, but was still a trophy and a ribbon and proud photos with the coach. On the drive home, Brianna held that trophy in her lap and talked excitedly about what they'd do differently next time, what moves they'd perfect, how they'd win first place at the next competition. Then she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. She said thank you. Not just for this trip, but for every trip, every costume, every lesson over the years. She said she finally understood what it meant that I'd made all of that possible. She said she'd never forget it again. But the consequences of her original post weren't done unfolding. 2 weeks after the competition, I got called into HR again. This time, it wasn't Nadine delivering the news, but a woman from corporate I'd never met. Someone with a tight smile and a tablet full of documentation. She explained that the hospital was implementing new social media policies in response to recent incidents. Employees and their family members could no longer post any identifying information about the hospital, including pay stubs, badges, uniforms, or facility names. Violation of this policy could result in termination. I pointed out that I hadn't posted anything, that my daughter had done it without my knowledge or consent. The HR woman acknowledged this but said the policy was being applied across the board. She said I wasn't in trouble, but I should be aware of the consequences going forward. She handed me a document to sign confirming I understood the new policy. I signed it with shaking hands, feeling like I'd narrowly avoided a firing that wouldn't have been fair, but would have been legal. Brianna felt terrible when I told her about the HR meeting. She said she hadn't thought about my job being at risk, only about getting attention online. I told her that was the problem with internet culture. Everything felt consequence-free because you were sitting in your bedroom pressing buttons on a phone, but real people lived on the other end of those posts. Real lives that could be destroyed by a joke that stopped being funny. She asked what she could do to fix it, and I told her there was nothing to fix. The damage was done. The policy was in place. All we could do was move forward and be more careful. She nodded and went to her room, and through the door I could hear her crying again. Part of me felt bad for being so blunt. Part of me knew she needed to understand the full weight of what she'd done. 16 was old enough to reckon with consequences. The summer arrived, and with it a change in Brianna that I almost didn't recognize. She'd been promoted to shift leader at the cafe, making $12.50 an hour now instead of $11. She worked 20 hours a week and saved more than she spent. She'd taken over grocery shopping duties, comparing prices and using coupons I'd taught her to find online. When her friends wanted to go to an expensive concert, she calculated the cost and decided it wasn't worth it, choosing instead to have them over for a movie night at the apartment. Jade had stopped coming around entirely. Brianna said they'd grown apart, that Jade didn't understand her anymore, that talking to someone who'd never worked a day in their life felt frustrating. New friendships formed with coworkers from the cafe, kids who understood what it meant to earn your own money, who didn't mock anyone for what their parents did. The shift was subtle but profound. My daughter was becoming someone different, Someone more aware, someone kinder. But the past has a way of catching up. In July, Derek showed up at our apartment unannounced. He'd tracked down our address somehow, probably through Brianna's school records he technically still had access to. I came home from a shift to find him sitting on our building's front steps, looking older than I remembered, grayer and thicker around the middle. He stood when he saw me and started talking immediately, not even letting me get my keys out. He said he wanted to reconnect with Brianna. He said he'd seen her video online, the one where she apologized, and it made him think about what kind of father he'd been. He said his marriage had ended and he was reassessing his priorities. He said he wanted to make things right. I stood there in my scrubs, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, and laughed in his face. I asked where this desire to make things right had been for the past 12 years. I asked about the $15,000 in back child support he'd never paid. I asked about the birthdays he'd missed, the holidays he'd forgotten, the dance recitals he'd promised to attend, and then flaked on. He had excuses for everything. Work stress, his ex-wife controlling him, depression, distance. None of it mattered. Brianna heard us talking from her bedroom window. She came downstairs and stood beside me, looking at her father with an expression I couldn't decode. Derek lit up when he saw her, moving toward her with his arms open for a hug. She stepped back and crossed her arms. She asked him why he was here. He gave the same speech he'd given me, about reconnecting, about making things right. She listened silently, then asked one question. Did he know how much dance competitions cost? He blinked, confused by the non sequitur. She told him. She listed the registration fees, the costumes, the travel, the hotels. She said her mom had paid for all of it every year on $18.75 an hour. She said she'd posted that salary online to mock it, and she'd been wrong because that salary had given her everything, while his much larger income had given her nothing. Derek's face went through confusion, then embarrassment, then anger. He said he hadn't come here to be attacked. Brianna said she hadn't asked him to come at all. He left without another word, and we watched him go together. She reached for my hand as his car pulled away, and I squeezed it tight. August brought the anniversary of the original post. I didn't realize it consciously, but my body remembered, waking me at 2 a.m. with a racing heart. I got up and walked to the kitchen for water, and found Brianna already there, sitting at the table in the dark. She looked up when I came in and said she couldn't sleep either. We sat together in silence for a while, two people who'd been through something hard together and come out different on the other side. She asked if I'd forgiven her. I thought about it carefully before answering. I said forgiveness was complicated. I said I understood now that she'd been young and thoughtless, not malicious. I said I'd watched her grow more in the past 4 months than in the previous 4 years. I said I was proud of who she was becoming. But I also said that some hurts didn't fully heal, that I would always remember the humiliation of seeing my salary mocked by thousands of strangers, that the scar tissue would always be there even if the wound had closed. She nodded like she understood. She said she didn't expect me to fully forgive her. She just wanted me to know she'd never stop being sorry. The new school year started with junior year, and Brianna approached it differently than she'd approached anything before. She signed up for an AP economics class because she wanted to understand money better. She joined the school's financial literacy club because she wanted to help other kids avoid her mistakes. She kept her job at the cafe even though it meant less free time, and she managed her schedule with a maturity that impressed even her teachers. Mr. Okafor, the counselor who'd almost suspended her, stopped me one day at a school event. He said Brianna had transformed into one of the most responsible students he'd seen. He said whatever I'd done, it had worked. I didn't tell him the whole story, just said she'd learned some hard lessons. He nodded like he understood, even though he couldn't possibly understand all of it. No one could who hadn't lived through those months of embarrassment and growth and painful conversations. Brianna's video about my salary continued to circulate, finding new audiences as the school year progressed. Other teenagers reached out to her, saying they'd done similar things, mocked their parents online for cheap laughs. She started responding to them, sharing what she'd learned, encouraging them to apologize and do better. Without meaning to, she became a kind of advocate for treating parents with respect, for understanding the financial realities that adults navigated invisibly. A local podcast invited her to speak about her experience, and I drove her to the studio to record the episode. I sat in the waiting room listening through the window as she told her story with a self-awareness that made my chest tight. She didn't make excuses. She owned what she'd done. She explained the consequences and the lessons. When the host asked if she had any regrets beyond the obvious ones, she said she wished she'd learned sooner. She said she wished every teenager could work a minimum wage job for a month before they were allowed on social media. The host laughed, but Brianna was serious. The podcast episode went moderately viral, reaching people far beyond our small city. I got messages from other parents sharing similar stories, teenagers who'd humiliated them online and then been horrified by the aftermath. Some of them asked what I'd done to turn things around, and I told them about the budgeting sessions, the job requirement, the brutal honesty about our financial situation. Not everyone agreed with my approach. Some said I was too harsh, that teenagers didn't need to understand adult problems, that I'd parentified my child by making her worry about bills. I disagreed, but didn't argue. Every family was different. Every kid needed different lessons. Brianna had needed to see the reality of our lives to understand her role in them. That might not be true for every teenager, but it had been true for her. The proof was in how much she'd changed. The holidays that year felt different from any I remembered. Brianna insisted on helping with Thanksgiving dinner, researching recipes that used affordable ingredients, planning a menu that would stretch across multiple meals. She invited her cafe friends over since many of them didn't have big family gatherings to attend. The apartment was full in a way it hadn't been in years. Young people laughing and eating and playing card games in the living room. I watched from the kitchen doorway, this life I'd built on $18.75 an hour, and felt something close to peace. The money would never be enough. The struggle would never fully end. But we had what mattered. Each other, community, a shared understanding of what it took to survive. Brianna caught me watching and smiled in a way that reached her eyes. She came over and hugged me in front of everyone, whispering that she loved me. I whispered it back, holding her tight against the world. Winter brought college preparation and the inevitable conversations about cost. Brianna had realistic expectations now, knowing exactly what I could contribute and what she'd need to cover through loans, scholarships, and work study. We researched schools together, ruling out the expensive private universities she'd once dreamed about, focusing instead on state schools with strong programs and reasonable tuition. She applied for every scholarship she could find, writing essays about financial literacy, about learning from mistakes, about understanding the value of labor. Her grades were strong. Her extracurriculars were solid. Her story, painful as it was, had become a strength. She turned 16 years of ignorance and 4 months of brutal awakening into compelling personal statements that admissions officers couldn't ignore. The acceptance letters came in March. 4 schools wanted her. 2 offered partial scholarships. 1, a state university with a good business program, offered enough aid that she could graduate with minimal debt if she worked part-time and lived frugally. We cried together when we read that letter, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd first shown her the reality of our finances. She kept touching the paper like she couldn't believe it was real, this future that had opened up because she'd learned to see beyond herself. I thought about all the hours I'd worked, all the meals I'd skipped, all the new clothes I hadn't bought. It added up to this moment, this letter, this daughter who would go further than I ever had. The salary she'd mocked had built a foundation for her to stand on. 6 months after the original post that destroyed and then rebuilt our relationship, Brianna gave a speech at her school's financial literacy fair. I sat in the audience with other parents, many of whom I recognized from the PTA meetings I'd attended for years. Some of them had seen the original salary post. Some had probably laughed at it. Now they were watching my daughter explain the difference between needs and wants, between gross and net income, between building credit and destroying it. She used our story as a case study, anonymizing details but making the lessons clear. Teenagers needed to understand that their parents' labor translated directly into their comfort. Mockery had real consequences. Gratitude wasn't optional. When she finished, the applause was genuine. Parents came up to me afterwards saying they wished their kids had half the maturity Brianna had developed. I wanted to tell them that maturity came from pain, from mistakes, from hitting bottom and choosing to climb back up. But I just smiled and said thank you. The day before Brianna left for college, we sat together in the living room of our small apartment. She'd packed everything she owned into boxes that waited by the door. The Nissan was loaded with her bedding and clothes and the mini fridge we'd bought at a thrift store. We weren't fighting. We weren't crying. We were just sitting, mother and daughter, in the home where she'd grown up despite everything working against us. She asked if I remembered what I'd said that first day, when I'd shown her all the bills. I said I remembered every word. She said she'd been thinking about it lately, about how that conversation had changed the entire trajectory of her life. She said if she hadn't posted that screenshot, she might have coasted through high school oblivious, gone to college expecting someone else to pay for everything, struggled when reality finally hit her. She said in a twisted way, she was grateful for her mistake because it had forced her to grow up. I told her that was a very mature perspective. I also told her not to recommend public humiliation as a growth strategy. And the morning she left, we hugged in the parking lot of her dorm, while other families unloaded their own cars around us. Some of those parents drove new SUVs loaded with brand new furniture. Some of those kids had never worked a day in their lives. Brianna looked at them without envy, just acknowledgement. She'd chosen a different path, one paved with cafe shifts and budgeting spreadsheets and a deep understanding of what things actually cost. When we finally let go, she told me she'd call every Sunday. She told me to take care of myself, to maybe buy some new clothes, to consider using some of the money I usually spent on her for myself instead. I laughed and said old habits were hard to break, but I promised to try. She walked into her dorm building carrying everything she needed, everything I'd been able to give her, everything she'd learned to earn on her own. I drove home alone in the Nissan with 140,000 miles, past the hospital where I'd work my next shift in 2 days, past the cafe where Brianna had become someone new, past all the ordinary places where our extraordinary year had unfolded. 3 years later, Brianna graduated with honors and a job offer from a financial planning firm that specialized in helping low-income families build wealth. She'd turned our experience into a career, my salary into her mission. At her graduation dinner, paid for with her own signing bonus, she raised a glass and toasted the woman who'd taught her everything she knew about money by showing her how hard it was to earn, how easy it was to waste, and how much it meant when someone gave it to you out of love instead of obligation. I looked at my daughter across that restaurant table, this adult who'd emerged from the ashes of one viral post, and felt the weight of 16 years lift from my shoulders. The salary wasn't embarrassing anymore. It had never been embarrassing. It was proof of survival, of persistence, of a mother who'd worked harder than anyone would ever know to give her child a chance. Brianna understood that now, and so did I. When we left the restaurant that night, walking through the parking lot toward our separate cars because she owned her own now, she turned back and said something I'd never forget. That $18.75 bought everything I am. I drove home through streets that looked the same as they always had, but somehow felt different, lighter, like the weight of survival had finally transformed into something closer to victory.